Lately, I have been getting a lot of questions on how to address a gap year in your resume or in general in your career. It could be in your job interviews or MBA interviews. So I thought in this week's video, I'm going to address exactly that. Hi everyone, welcome to Insider GAN. My name is Soumi. I'm an IIT Delhi and ISB Hyderabad graduate. I have been working in the management consulting and banking sectors for over 9 years now. On this channel, I share my experiences, my mistakes, my journey, and I get my friends to share their experiences as well so that it can help some of you guys in your journey as well. So if that's something that you are interested in, please consider subscribing to the channel. Okay, so how do you explain a gap in your career in an interview? Firstly, let's address what is a gap in your resume. Say for instance, you have not been working for 3+ months, or you have taken a year break to figure out your life or maybe to prepare for an exam. Sometimes what happens is in an MBA interview or in a job interview, people will ask you, what were you doing during this time? And that is what is meant by a gap in your career or your resume. So in order to understand what is the best way to answer these questions in an interview, it's important to understand why the interviewer is asking you these questions in first place. So in my opinion, there are really 3 reasons why an interviewer would ask you about a gap in your resume in an interview. And reason number 1 is they genuinely want to know what you were doing in that gap period, because gaps are not very normal, right? It's not so normal that people are not intrigued. If you lie, what will happen is it might come back to bite you at a later time. And I'm also assuming that if you are taking a gap year, there must be some solid reason behind it, right? So it's important that you are honest and upfront about it. The second reason why you could be asked to explain your gap year is because the interviewer wants to ensure that this will not impact your role within that company or your chances of joining the program. They want to ensure that you, when you are interviewing for a job or you are appearing for an MBA program or a master's program, you are totally committed to it and you won't back out at the last moment. Because a lot of times what happens is, for example, in a job, when you are hired, companies do spend a lot of money in training you, in getting you up to speed so that you can deliver that role very well. And then if you are not committed to that role, if you, say for instance, leave that role for another gap in your career 1 year down the lane, it's just a huge cost which companies won't want to bear, right? So to address this concern of the interviewer, you should always ensure to communicate how committed you are to that role and also talk more and more about your skills for that specific job role or an MBA program. And the third reason why they could be asking you for an explanation for your gap year is because they really want to understand what kind of a person you are. How do you think? What is your thought process? And that could really tell them a lot about whether you are a good fit for the company, given the company culture, etc. or not. So to address this concern of the interviewer, I would recommend that you are as genuine as possible and you don't ever be defensive. Because when you are defensive, when you are less confident, it doesn't give the interviewer confidence that you will be able to do well in this role, right? No saying that, my last job was really, really bad, which is why I quit it. None of those things. Just have a positive outlook, be confident, be honest, and focus on your skills that you are bringing to the table. That is going to justify your selection into that specific job interview or a master's program. With that, let me move to the next part of the video, which is what are some of the common reasons of a gap in your resume and how to address them case by case. The first type of gap in people's resumes are usually due to personal reasons, which are sort of a compulsion for you. For example, maybe you have taken a break to take care of one of your family members who was ill. Or maybe you have taken a parenting break, especially for women during maternity. A lot of women do take like 6-7 months after giving birth to a child to sort of recuperate and get themselves ready to be back into the job market. Or maybe there were some personal emergencies which you couldn't avoid and which is why you had to take a break. So how do you address this? Now for this, I would definitely recommend be as honest as possible. Explain the exact reason why you had to take a break, but focus on these 2 things, okay? Number 1 is to communicate that whatever was holding you back during that period has now been resolved. That's going to show that you are committed to the role now and that you will not likely take another similar career gap in future. And the other thing that I would want you to keep in mind is that you are updated on what the requirements of the role are, especially these days when things are changing at such a fast pace, and someone who would go on a personal emergency kind of a leave or a personal leave would at least be gone away from the job market for 2 to 3 years, maybe even, right? So you want to ensure you communicate that whatever skill sets you had about 2 to 3 years back, you have been working somehow to sort of revamp yourself and you are up to date and at what is going on in the job market today. And if you have taken any courses or you have done something to come up to speed on that, maybe you have just been talking to your colleagues, or maybe you have just taken a few courses to come up to speed. Focus on all of those things to explain the gap here, because at the end of the day, the interviewer is looking for whether you are fit for the job or not, whether you will be able to do the role or not, whether you have the right skill sets or not. That's all that they're worried about, right? Moving to the second reason why a lot of people are taking a break these days is these are also personal reasons, but not necessarily a compulsion, I would say. For example, a lot of people are taking breaks to travel around the world. A lot of people are taking break to just figure things out, how they're going to plan the next 10 years of their life, or just taking a step back and evaluating their situation and figuring out the roadmap for them. Again, it's not very common in India yet, but it's coming up. And honestly, it's a great reason. I mean, I always encourage my mentees to do that if required. So when you're explaining a gap because of this reason, I want you to keep in mind these 3 things. Number 1 is, of course, be honest. Be very honest of what you have been doing this past 1 year, if you have been figuring things out or just traveling around. Number 2, let them know very, very clearly what was it that you were actually doing during that time. For example, if you were traveling, then what are some of the places you went to and what was your motivation for traveling to those places? Or if you have just been figuring your way out, what are some of the things that you did to actually figure things out for yourself? Did you take some courses? Did you volunteer maybe? And especially now that you are applying to a specific role or an MBA program, the hypothesis is that you have figured your way out. So focus on some of the things that you did during that period which makes you suitable for that specific job role or a master's program. And lastly, focus on what were your learnings, what were some of the things that you picked up that you can apply to this specific role. For example, if you were traveling, you could say that during my travel days, I learned to push myself out of my comfort zone. I learned to adapt to different cultures, be comfortable around different kinds of people, getting to know the cultures of different places. And also it honed my communication and interpersonal skills. So that was just an example, but you get the drift, right? You focus on these 3 things if it's a personal reason where you don't have a compulsion to take a break. Now coming to the third reason, okay, why there's a lot of gap in people's resumes, and this is a little more tricky to address. The reason is when you, say for instance, have taken a break for appearing for an exam, a competitive exam like CAT or UPSC or even GMAT, or maybe you have just been trying to find a job for yourself and you have not managed to find a good role. And this is what a lot of people reach out to me on my YouTube comments and on my email as well, that they have been preparing for CAT for 1 or 2 years, haven't been able to clear the exam. Now they just are left with a few gap years on their resume. So how do they go about explaining it? Or maybe someone was preparing for UPSC exams for a couple of years, they couldn't make it, and now maybe they want to do an MBA. So how do you address this? I would say that there can be 2 scenarios over here, right? One is you have taken a gap year for preparing an exam or for preparing for a job interview and you have been successful. So this is an easier problem to solve because you can just go ahead and be very, very honest and tell the person that this was a important benchmark, a milestone in your overall career, which is why you took a break, you prepared for the exam, you gave it some time, and yes, maybe you failed 1 or 2 times, but eventually you succeeded, and that's absolutely okay. Maybe you can also focus on what were some of the learnings during this period. If you, for example, if you're trying for different job interviews and if you were getting rejected, you could always tell them that, these are some of the feedback that I have got during those interviews and this is how I've improved. moved. So focus on all the things that you have gained, or like how you have grown during that process. And at the end of the day, failures are okay. Everyone fails. If you are in this kind of a situation, don't be worried at all. Just be confident. Now moving to the next situation, where maybe you were preparing for that exam but you were not successful, and now you are having to pivot your career in a different direction. Maybe you were preparing for CAT, but because you couldn't get in, now you were looking for a job. Or maybe you were preparing for UPSC, you didn't get in, and now you want to move into the corporates. So this is definitely a little bit of a tricky situation to be in. If you, for example, tried for something and then you drastically have to pivot to something else, you might come out as a person who is not very clear about their career goals, right? First, they were preparing for UPSC, say for instance, now they want to go into the corporates, and the interviewer, if you're not able to build a good story around it, the interviewer will just be confused, which is why this is a tricky situation to be in, and your story or your justification needs to be very, very solid. Whatever you say is not the optimal solution. It's always going to be a suboptimal solution, but अगर directly किसी ने पूछ लिया to explain the gap in your career, what do you do, right? You can do the best at that point that you can. So we'll go with that assumption. I'll give you a few situations based on what kind of people have reached out to me for, and give you the step-by-step answer on how to address them. But some general funding, again, you should be confident. You should focus on some of the transferable skills. What are some of the transferable skills if you were working in a specific direction, but now you have to pivot and move to another direction? And try not to be defensive and bring career gaps by yourself. Answer it only when you are specifically asked to justify the gap. And at all points of time, just try to focus on your suitability for that role. Try to focus on what skills you have, how you have had relevant experiences in the past, which makes you suitable for a job or an MBA program. Just try to steer the conversation in that way to the extent possible. Okay, now moving to the specific situations, and I do have all my notes over here. One of the common comments that I do get from UPSC aspirants is, they have been preparing for UPSC, and what they want to do is they want to focus on MBA. What you can say in this kind of a situation is that your long-term vision was always to create impact at the grassroots levels of India, and earlier you were trying to do that via the UPSC route by entering the administration. But now, since you have not been successful in that route, you are trying a different route out. Your end goal is still the same, to create impact at the grassroots levels of India, but what you're doing now is to go via the corporate route. So that is why you want to do an MBA, because MBA sort of gives you a reset to your career, and if you're doing it from a good brand, you get a stepping stone as well. And post your MBA, maybe you want to get into the development sector, maybe you want to work in one of the NGOs, or maybe you want to start an NGO or thing of your own, for which your knowledge in UPSC, all the things that you gained, your knowledge about Indian markets, about what's going on at the grassroots levels of India, is definitely going to play a huge role. And at the same time, a little bit of business knowledge while doing MBA is going to just enhance your profile for these kind of roles. So that's the first situation. Now moving to the second situation, where you have been preparing for UPSC, but now you want to move to a corporate job or a normal job. The situation over here is similar and slightly simpler from the previous one, because all you have to do is, firstly, you have to find a job where your transferable skills from your UPSC preparation is going to come into play, is going to be helpful. You can try to move into the development sector, or maybe work in one of the government institutes. Could also join some of these consulting companies in their government consulting arms. So first thing is for you to look for relevant roles, and secondly, again, you want to remind them that your end goal is still the same, which is to create impact somehow. Now let's move on from UPSC, because a lot of people who reach out to me are also preparing for CAT, and that's why they have a gap year in their resume. Let's say you are a fresher, right? They are just preparing for CAT, and by the time they realize that they have wasted like 2-3 years, it's sort of a huge gap in your resume, which you definitely have to somehow justify to your recruiter. So how do you address this? Firstly, you let them know that the kind of roles that you were getting from college were not as per your interests, which I'm guessing would be the case, which is why you didn't take up those jobs in first place. So let them know that I wanted to wait for the right role, and during that time, I tried out a few different things. I tried the MBA route, I was preparing for CAT, I was not successful over there. I was also interviewing for jobs where I wanted to make in, but I realized that there were definite gaps in my resume, which is why I have been preparing myself. I have been taking courses or whatever basically you have been doing to prepare yourself for that specific role. You mention those and then say that with every interview, with every failure, these are some of the things that I've learned, and finally now I think I'm fully ready to take this role up. Again, focus on the skills that you have that you can bring to the table for that specific role. And then the last case could be that you took a break for CAT preparation. Now you want to get into the job market, but you do have some work experience before your MBA. So how do you address that? I think the best way to answer this is just by letting the person know that the reason you took a break for MBA is because whatever your reason might have been, that because maybe you were feeling stuck at your previous job and maybe you wanted to move from the technical side to the management side, which is why you thought MBA would be the fastest and the easiest option for you. So you took a break, you were preparing for your CAT examinations, and after having been unsuccessful for a few years, now you are trying to pivot. And now what you are doing is also talking to maybe a lot of people who have been in a similar kind of a situation to understand how their career has grown up. And you have figured out that there are enough examples in the market where people without having done an MBA are having a great career trajectory just by sheer passion and hard work. So with that, now you are convinced that you can do the same, and that's why now you want to get back into the job market and then start focusing on the skills that you can bring to the table from your previous work experiences, and just leave it at that. So these were all the ways how you can answer a career gap in your resume. Now I want to address one last question, which is very common that I get, is people asking whether they should be taking a gap year to prepare for CAT. My honest recommendation for you is going to be no, don't take a gap year just to prepare for CAT, because firstly, CAT is not perceived to be that difficult an exam that you need a full year of preparation. So if you have to take a break to figure things out and explore, do a lot of internships, that's okay. But just for CAT preparation, I would definitely recommend don't do it. And secondly, you get points for WorkX when you are going for MBA. So why would you want to lose out on that? But still, if for some reason you think that you still need to take a gap year to just prepare solely for CAT, I would strongly recommend that you keep doing something on the side as well, so that you will have enough talking points and you will have things to justify that 1 year gap. It could be things to build your profile, like you could be working in an NGO, you could be working in the development sector, you could be doing random internships, you could be doing a little bit of freelancing work here and there. So all of these are okay, but don't sit absolutely idle, because that becomes a little difficult to explain in the interviews. With that, I come to the end of this video. I have compiled all my gap related thoughts in this one video, so I really hope you found it helpful. If you did, definitely hit the like button and share it with your friends, and definitely subscribe to the channel. Yeah, it's absolutely free for you. So yeah, that's about it. I'm going to see you next time with another interesting video. Till then, bye.